Buongiorno. Ecco. Hi, everybody. Do we need more time? Abbiamo ancora bisogno di tempo? Sì, preferisco qua. Shall we? Oh. So we have 3 seats here. Professor Vallerani, venga a sedersi in prima fila. No. Ma si sente, possiamo fare senza o siamo con? No, con, ok. Benissimo, buongiorno a tutti e a tutte. Hi everybody, and thank you for being here today, people who are in this wonderful room at Companionship, and thank you Professor Iovino for being here with us, just arrived from the States a few days ago, but looking wonderful and not jet lagged at all. 1 week. 1 week, okay, yeah. So, and thank you also to the people online who are following this event online. I am Francesca Tarocco, and I'm a professor of Buddhist studies and Chinese religions here at Foscari, and the director of NICHE. This is a moniker for the new Institute Center for Environmental Humanities at Foscari. The new institute is one of our sponsors, as well as the University of Foscari. And as you see on these wonderful green cards that you have on your seat, we aim to be an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary center that works, that produces scholarship and engagement on the environmental humanities. And today is our first annual lecture, and we are really grateful and happy for Serenella Iovino to be here with us. And I'm going to say a few words. Of course, Serenella is very famous and a friend of Foscari and a friend of many of us here. But I still want to say a few words for those of you who have not engaged with her scholarship as yet. So Professor Iovino is a professor of Italian studies and environmental humanities at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she's also here now in Foscari as a visiting professor for a few months, I believe, a month and a half or so. More, but hopefully more in the future. I want to say that that Professor Iovino is a very prolific author and editor of several volumes on the environmental humanities, many aspects of the environmental humanities. And she's also a very charismatic public speaker and a publicly engaged intellectual, which is a rare gift. Her book, perhaps one of her most important publications, is Eco-Criticism in Italy. And this is important to say because the book is now being translated or has been translated already into Italian and is going to be published for Il Saggiatore with a very interesting title, Paesaggi Italiani. Paesaggio civile, sorry, paesaggio civile, paesaggio civile. Today's talk is on, oh, and one more thing, she's also the co-editor of our very own Lagoonscapes, that's the Venice Journal of Environmental Humanities, together with a colleague here, a Foscari colleague, Stefano Beggiora, who's a scholar of India. So please check out the Lagoonscapes, which is available online, and it's already, I think, the second. You have three issues already out. Yeah, an excellent publication. So that's it from me, and please welcome Serenella Iovino for our NICHE inaugural lecture.
Well, it's difficult not to get emotional when one is introduced by people that one holds in very high esteem, and not only because, this bond with Foscari, for me, is important from a very in a very profound way, because I have found here not only important interlocutors, but also friends. And friendship is what keeps us alive, especially in dark times. And I think we are in dark times. But fortunately, we hold on together, we are together, and we are able to face these challenges in a way which help us not only survive, but also to be alive, which is very important. And so thank you so much, Francesca. Thank you to NICHE. Thank you to Foscari. Thank you to Shaul Bassi. Thanks everybody, and thank you for being here. I see many familiar faces, and so just being greeted in such a welcoming way is something which happens not to everybody. So I feel really privileged to be here among you all. Well, last time we were together at the Anthropocene campus. It was a few months ago, and we were having this conversation with Amitav Ghosh. Then we were together here at Cabotagin in 2019. 2019, October, then something happened. And then 2021 came. So there is a window between 2019 and 2091. Well, we believed when we were together in October that, you see, we had left the worst. We have already passed the big challenge of COVID, and nothing was going to happen again except for the end of the world. But the picture of the end of the world that we had in mind didn't have much to do with war. And in fact, reality surprises us once again. So we are actually here with another challenge that requires us to be faced. And this challenge is war. And I think it's very difficult to start any conversation, any cultural conversation, any cultural endeavor, especially when one talks about a subject like humaneness, when a war is just around the corner. So I'll try to break the ice with a cliche quote, and you'll forgive me. But I think that, first of all, poetry is always welcome to any audience, and that cliche quotes just make people feel at ease. Okay. Truly, I live in dark times. What kind of times are these when to talk about trees is almost a crime because it implies silence about so many horrors? Bertolt Brecht, of course. Truly, I live in dark times. So says Bertolt Brecht. And so, but the question is it really a crime to talk about trees now? Bertolt Brecht perhaps I didn't think about it, but there is, in fact, an ecology of war. And we have to, in this place, in this context, among us, we have to think about this ecology of war, and then talking about trees now is so incredibly important because we are defining our place in this world in which a war challenges our environmental imagination, and it challenges us to connect the dots. This ecology of war implies issues of land, is so clear. Issues of resources, so clear, of justice, of pollution, and of course, pollution which just reverberates and brings us so far away into the future. Issues of colonialism and imperialism, issues of geopolitics and biopolitics. But it also implies issues of non-human companionships and issues of humanity, humaneness. So this ecology of war that really prompts us to talk about trees is an ecology that challenges us to define what being human means. And of course, this is the question when we talk about the Anthropocene, the age of human, right? And you see, there are so many connections between a war and the Anthropocene. Many connections between, in a way, Anthropocene and war are perhaps overlapping, and perhaps the Anthropocene is the trigger of all these reverberations. And at the same time, it is the outcome of a mentality based on war, not only war to nature, among many quotation marks, but war, the Second World War. In fact, you know, the Anthropocene is still a hypothesis of geologists, but many geologists believe that the beginning of the Anthropocene might be connected to 1945. So when the nuclear fallout of the first bombs started just to appear into sediment on the crust of the earth. So war and Anthropocene. Of course, after the bombs, the visible bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there have been so many invisible bombs, so much fallout. And again, we see that thousands of bombs were there to mark the beginning of this time. So you see, ecology, war, humans, all together, and the need to address non-human existences. And of course, trees, of course, but also animals. And I believe that we, in order to understand what being human means, we need to talk about animals, because they help us really understand first what we are and then what we want to be. So they define us, they challenge us, and they, of course, invite us to become something better, something worse, I don't know. But imagine that, again, on the bombs and on the Anthropocene, imagine that in 1946, there were atomic experiments, nuclear experiments that involved directly non-human animals. And I'm talking about the crossroad operation in the Pacific, when the Bikini Island, the Bikini Atoll, was bombed, actually. And many, something like 2,000 animals were, so to speak, sacrificed in order for so the U.S. Army to understand that the nuclear that bomb was dangerous, or anyway, to understand what the effects of these bombs were. Very foreseeable, as a matter of fact. So you don't really need to drop a bomb on 2,000 goats and pigs and dogs in order to understand that this nuclear bomb is dangerous. But it's very interesting that a famous writer, and this writer is Italo Calvino, already in 1946 was addressing this issue of animals, and especially the goats that were sacrificed during this experiment. Let me read this quote for you. I read it in Italian first. Vi siete mai chiesti cosa avranno pensato le capre a bikini, e i gatti nelle case bombardate, e i cani in zone di guerra, e i pesci allo scoppio dei siluri? Come avranno giudicato noi uomini in quei momenti, nella loro logica che pure esiste, tanto più elementare, tanto più, stavo per dire, umana? Have you ever asked yourselves what the goats on Bikini must have thought, and the cats in bombed houses, and the dogs in war zones, and the fish struck by torpedoes? How must they have judged us humans, judged us humans in those moments, in their logic, which exists, and also saying simpler, is a much more humane logic. So these goats, if you are curious to see these goats, you can find them on the internet. They are caged and tied in small metal structures with a bucket of water and a bit of straw just scattered all around. So they're still there. You can see the pictures. But now, however, it is the situation is different, because today, if we reflect on the images of war that we see coming from the theater of war of Ukraine, we don't see goats, we don't see, or not only, we see people and dogs, people and cats together, embraced, hugged, just suffering together, traveling together, being refugees together. So what really struck us is this normality, is the normality. And again, this is a bad word, but I just want to address the fact that this is a familiar image. People with their pets. Sometimes they are rabbits, sometimes they are guinea pigs, you name it. Pets that live with them in the house, domestic pets. And it's beautiful also to stress this idea of being together in a home, which is per se an ecological relationship. So our relationship with our pets is the ecological relationship par excellence, because it takes place in the oikos, in the home, in the very home. It is our home, our relationship with our pets. And so, and this is what we see today. And we see that this is a very, very important issue because we see these dogs and cats traveling with their, let's say, humans. I don't want to say their owners, because everybody who has a pet knows that this question of ownership is sometimes problematic. So, these people with their pets together, they are traveling, they are escaping. But of course, a war also implies attacks to animals in shelters, to animals in zoos. And in fact, if you think about it, you must have read there are so many news about shelters or farms abandoned, because of course people cannot take care of these caged animals, or these animals in farms, for example. They are just forcefully abandoned by their owners. And you might have read also, for example, the news about the bombing of Kharkiv zoo at the end of February. 2,000 animals, caged animals, were killed or injured, and the few survivors just were scattered all around the city. And so if we go back to Calvino's question, what must the goats in bikini have thought? We can ask, what must the red wolves or the Siberian foxes in Kharkiv zoo have thought? Well, I don't know what they have thought. But I know what they have felt. They have felt fear, total fear, just like us. And this is a very interesting issue because we sometimes we can feel, whoever has a pet can feel that there is an overlapping of emotional and semiotic zones, space between us and them. But sometimes this is still underestimated, for example, by scientists or in many practices of our everyday lives. And of course, this is the issue, the gap between us and them. We feel them close to us, but we sometimes don't think about that they are very close to us, and we allow them to be experimented upon or treated as objects. Well, let's go back to the idea of companionship now. The idea of companionship between humans and non-humans and their bond has got as a long evolutionary history. Think that the archaeological excavations in Jordan have found evidence of a human buried together with a pet fox, an ancestor of dogs, some 14 to 17,000 years ago. or more recently, where 12 to 14,000 years ago, several dog-human burials have been identified at sites in Germany and Israel. And a cat-human burial dating from about 10,000 years ago has been discovered in Cyprus. As the archaeozoologist James Serpell writes, he writes, we cannot have a reason. We can only formulate hypotheses about why these people were buried along with their pets. But there are, the fact that they were buried together might demonstrate awareness of a special relationship between this individual during their lives. Well, this awareness of a special bond also has a history, because over the millennia it got lost. So it's really interesting. For example, there were periods of times in which to show affection toward an animal was considered a sign of weakness or even of guilt. Imagine that in the dark ages of witch hunting, people suspected of witchcraft could attract greater suspicion when they were displaying affection for a pet that was considered to be a familiar of the witch, and many times sentenced to death with the so-called witch. So you see, there are so many here, so many constructions of and constructs of discrimination, of ontological, and in this case of social gaps between those who decide what is good and those who, and of course those who pay for the effect of these decisions. And of course philosophy didn't help for many centuries, and philosophers have conceptualized an ontology based on the dualism between humans and non-humans. And Descartes, he was not the only one, infamously saw animals as machines, as animated clocks. And this kind of mentality, this ontology, let's call it by its name, has inspired scientific practices that have confined animals, even those historically and biologically closer to our species, to a limbo of non-mind. They didn't have a mind, they didn't have emotions, they were animated clocks. And of course, this has oriented a certain school that is now still working of scientific research. So we treat them as objects they are treated like objects in many cases, even though things are changing and have changed. In fact, a century and a half of evolutionism, of critical animal studies, of research in ethology, zoology, primatology, multi-species ethnography, zoosemiotics, and we must say more humane philosophies have worked to overcome this dualism, or we might say these trenches, because this is a war that we wage against the non-human beings. So thinkers and scholars and scientists have worked to fill these gaps, to reformulate this ontology. And this research made us understand that the world of other animals is indeed our world, that their actions and their emotion exist and combine with ours. Because for them too, sleeping in a shelter means suffering from cold and hunger and feeling insecure. They too, like us, are refugees and migrants, and their pain is our pain. Animals, in other words, are subjects, and our life with them is a form of intersubjectivity. This is what, there is an ethologist called Dominique Lestel. He calls these hybrid communities, hybrid intersubjectivities, semiotic communities, because we exchanged science with them. We understand each other in this zone that we share, in this shared semiotic space. And Yet we talk about intersubjectivity. Acknowledging this, it has been not always easy. For example, one of the theories of intersubjectivity, Emmanuel Levinas, also believed that animals were not subjects. You know, Emmanuel Levinas has formulated his ethics, which is also an ontology. It's profoundly rooted. There is a common root between ethics and ontology in Levinas. And this says that the face of the other person, the face, le visage d'autrui, the other's face, calls me with infinitely to recognize them. The face is calling me. Le visage d'autrui calls me and tells me, please don't kill me. And this is the basis of his ethics. And yet, for Levinas, this gesture of acknowledgement was only for people. In fact, he tells he has an essay, a very short essay. I think it's 5 pages, if not shorter, but it's a seminal essay. I think in one of the most commented piece of philosophy. Of course, by animal studies people. So the title of the essay is Name of a Dog or Natural Law. And it's the story of Bobby, the lager dog. Appearing out of nowhere, every evening, Bobby used to welcome prisoners returning from the forced labor. So Bobby only wagged his tail to the prisoner. He didn't greet with the same affection. So he didn't greet at all the Nazis in the camp. So Bobby was really making a difference. He knew whom he had to display a sign of affection, whom he had to welcome. Then Bobby disappeared and he was nowhere to be seen. He was perhaps killed by the Nazis. So anyway, Levinas tells us that Bobby was the last Kantian in Nazi Germany. But at the same time, Levinas emphasizes the fact that Bobby did not have a face. So yet because Bobby lacked the capacity to think. This is what Levinas says. He didn't have the mind necessary to universalize. Okay. Bobby didn't have a face. Only humans have a face and only theirs is the realm of ethics, right? But what is that wagging a tail, if not a language? What is this making a difference between the prisoners and the Nazis, if not an ethics? This capacity to discern between good people and bad people in that case. There is a philosopher, Peter Steeves, that says, what could Bobby be missing? Is his snout too pointy to constitute a face? Is his nose too wet? Do his ears hang low? Do they wobble to and fro? How can this not be a face? And in fact, Bobby had a face and he had a specific intelligence. And by specific, I mean he had the intelligence of his species. And that was an intelligence. And of course, this created the possibility for him and other people to communicate. So we must really overcome this trench once again, traced by, in this case, by philosophy. We have to try to overcome these trenches. And of course, we have to recognize that every individual is the carrier, the bearer of a system of signs that are, in fact, a possibility of universalize in their own capacity, in their own specificity. And so we really can say that Bobby invites us to think about the mind of dogs, but he also invites us to think about what it means to be an individual. So we have to see both the capacity to send signals, send signs, send messages, and the capacity to be one, to be unique. And I think that this is the big challenge that we must face today when talking about animals, because the first thing, I think the main hampering, the main obstacle to recognizing their subjectivity is the massification, is the way we really see them as a mass of individuals, or simply a general concept. We have to, when we see other people, people that we know their names, we know their faces, we know them as individuals, but for some reasons we think about animals, just the word animals, as it's so general. We have to overcome that. And perhaps literature or more humane philosophies can help us. And here again, if we think about, let's just leave war for a minute. We are talking, this is in the background of our mind, there is always war now. But there are other sites where the Anthropocene confines these other humans. Zones of confinements are there to be found, for example, in industrial farming places. They can be found in, for example, in labs where pharmaceutical experiments are performed, or another place, zoos. We were talking about Kharkiv Zoo. Well, if we think about zoos are very interesting to think with, we could say, because all these three places, so the industrial farm, the zoo, and the lab, are typical Anthropocenic institutions. They didn't exist before the, let's say, the Industrial Revolution. So we take the beginning of Anthropocene a little bit larger now, but they really appeared in the second half of the, in the form of, let's say, in a more established form, in a more also massified form, towards the end of the 19th century. And especially if we see zoos, zoos are interesting subjects, I was saying. And I would like to bring back the concept that Levinas uses of the face and connect it to an experience that Italo Calvino has in the Barcelona Zoo. We might have read Mr. Palomar, and I here refer to the episode Il Gorilla Albino, so the albino gorilla. This is also very interesting because it's really an example that allows us to see how literature can, again, bring us nearer to other animals that are in fact very close to us. And in this case, we have Calvino, Mr. Palomar. It's a real experience that Calvino had. In fact, before writing this this episode in the book, he writes an article for La Repubblica that was in May, just in the 16th of May, so 1918, so a few years ago, but in these precise days. And so he tells the story of a visit to this Barcelona Zoo. He visits the primate section, and he lingers on this gorilla and finds him lonely with this nearly human pink face, and he see the gorilla, the albino gorilla, Snowflake, Copito de Nieve, Fiocco di Neve. He finds him as a sad giant, imprisoned in a house cage, which he describes as a concentrationary structure, without a tree, without a game, without anything, just as empty as a prison, even though it was, of course, a little bit larger than a prison cell. And it's really interesting because here Calvino is able to describe the boredom of this being, of this creature, which is deprived of any semiotic reference of, so his universe, his jungle is emptied of every story, of every sign, so it's completely, it's a desert. And this reminds me of a quote that I found in a famous primatologist, Franz de Waal, who says, you can take the ape out of the jungle, but you can never take the jungle out of the ape. It's always there. And so this said giant was in an empty space, just completely bored. And Calvino says, al di là di una vetrata, fiocco di neve è una montagna di carne e pelo bianco. La maschera facciale è d'un roseo umano, lavorata dalle rughe. Quel viso da gigante triste, ogni tanto si volta verso la folla dei visitatori oltre il vetro. Un lento sguardo carico di desolazione e pazienza e noia, uno sguardo che esprime tutta la rassegnazione a essere come si è, unico esemplare al mondo di una forma non scelta, non amata, tutta la fatica di portarsi addosso la propria singolarità, tutta la pena d'occupare lo spazio e il tempo con la propria presenza così ingombrante e vistosa. Beyond a sheet plate of plate glass, Copito de Nieve is a mountain of flesh and white hide. The facial mask is a human pink, carved by wrinkles. Every now and then, that sad giant turns upon the crowd of visitors beyond the glass. A slow gaze charged with desolation and patience and boredom, a gaze that expresses all the resignation at being the way he is, sole exemplar in the world of a form not chosen, not loved, all the effort of bearing his own singularity and the suffering at occupying space and time with his presence, so cumbersome and evident. So you see, we are really at the antipodes of Levinas. Not only Copito de Nieve, snowflake, does have a face, but this face is sad, is really desolated, is bored. And of course, it expresses all the desolation, all the sadness of being, of a singularity not chosen, right? But a singularity. So Calvino is able, and perhaps it is because he's a writer and not a theorist only, is able to let us see this singularity, even in its problems, even in its pain, profound pain, because it is because of this singularity, not chosen singularity, that Copito de Nieve is there, because he is white, right? And it's incredible. This is a case in which whiteness and blackness are really in a very interesting conversation. I don't want to linger too much on that, but this is an interesting subject. And let me tell you the most important thing. Why am I quoting you this story? Because this is a real story. This is not something that Calvino made up. It's a colonial story, a homage to my friend Charles. So it's in 1966, in Equatorial Guinea, a peasant, probably a poacher, killed a pack of gorillas, only sparing the life of this curiously white cub. It was almost two years old. And so the white baby gorilla was sold to a Catalan primatologist who brought him to Spain. So this poacher killed this pack of gorillas, and he saw this terrified cub hanging at the dead body of his mother. That's a very sad, I mean, a poignant picture, terrible. And so he didn't kill the white gorilla. He sold it to a Catalan primatologist. And before ending up in the Barcelona Zoo, the gorilla lived with the family of this Savater P, was the name of the primatology, and he was humanized. So he spent, I think, at least 1 year or even more before he was brought to the zoo. He spent a year playing with the son, Francisco, the son of the family, dressed like a baby a toddler at this point, eating things that a toddler would eat, just hugging the mother of the family. And then when he was just growing too big to be there, he was sent into a zoo. Of course, we might say he was treated like a superstar. He was so famous. But then, of course, he was no longer a baby gorilla. He was no longer pleasant to live with. His singularity just diverted him directly to the cage of a zoo. And this was his fate. So if you want to know more about it, there is a very nice Wikipedia page about him, especially the Catalan one. And you might also see that after he died in 2003. So a few years later, a few years after Calvino had seen him, so in 2003, and Calvino saw him in 1980. So he died from skin cancer. And after his death, an asteroid was named after him. So you see, a superstar, but of course, yes, but this means that he was not a person, he was not a subject, he was an object. So perhaps even an object to be sold in a way. And this colonial story prompts a further consideration, namely that zoos are colonial institutions. The London Zoological Society, one of the first of its kind, was founded by Sir Stamford Raffles in 1826 with the purpose of collecting the animals that he had captured in Southeastern Asia while working as a trader for the East India Company, for example. And there is a quote by Randy Malamud, who is one of the most important scholars of zoos, and he says, he plundered exotic commercial goods in his professional employment and plundered the animal world as a hobby. And then the zoos and the animals thus became part of the discourse that reinforced the hegemonies of imperialism. So, and not by accident, the animals displayed in the zoo cages in the late 19th century, in the zoo cages of all the biggest zoos in Europe, were also human animals. There is another interesting work by Oliver O'Hadle, Darwin in the Monkey Cage. And so it says, humans staged as strange and exotic were exhibited alongside lions and monkeys, for example. And so you could see popular attractions like Eskimos displayed with their sled dogs, or Sudanese people with their camels, Sri Lankans with elephants. And the most infamous case is the one of the Congolese Otabenga. I see that you are nodding, Federica, so I think you know this case. And Otabenga, a Congolese, in 1906 was exhibited at the Bronx Zoo in the same cage with an orangutan. It was set free after many, of course, there were complaints and letters to the municipality, to the zoos, institutions, etc. But Otabenga then committed suicide. He was so marked by this experience that was an experience of profound discrimination that lasted also after this very episode. That, you see, these are telling stories. Of course, I don't need to remind you that we have so many things in common with primates, that we share the 98% of DNA, that primatology research has emphasized that we, for example, have the same behavioral patterns. Not only our bodies are so similar, the design of our bodies is so similar, but we also share the same this is Frans de Waal. I'm quoting Frans de Waal, but you can of course think about the research of Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, also Donna Haraway. There are so many interesting research pieces that can testify of this similarity, and of course they are part of this semiotic community that we are with these other creatures. And I want to remind a famous quote, a quote by Anna Maria Ortese, which is very dear to me, and she says, "We lack of historical memory, but most of all, we lack of biological memory." We have really lost these connections, even though our genes tells us this story. They really deliver us this story. And of course, if we depersonalize these subjects, we lose this story even more. And here, I want to take another step. So I don't know how much time do I have, Francesca? Say 10, 15? Yeah, okay. So from zoos, from war, let's go to another subject, which is very interesting for the Anthropocene. Extinction, right? This is a subject that I suffer very much, but I love to talk about extinction because I think that one of the main problems when one talks about extinction is that we are depending on figures, we are depending on numbers, and we cannot really assess how terrible this phenomenon is because we just see the masses, we see the multitudes, and we are not able to contain multitudes. I'm so sorry. So, if we give these animals a face, we can try to correct this perception. And I think that even science can help us. I have a wonderful quote by David Quammen, who is biologist, a geobiologist. We all know him because of spillover. And he has this beautiful quote about the dodo, but I'm not going to read it for you. No, shall I? Yeah, okay. Because I don't know, because I read it when I was speaking here in 2019. Shall I read it again? Okay, I'll read it very, very fast first in English and then in Italian. No, first in Italian and then in English. All right. Okay. Il Rafus cucullatus. You know that the dodo is this very funny animal, a non-flying bird that was to be found in New Zealand, and it was brought to extinction sometime around 1670 because, of course, of the colonizers, right? So they used to slaughter dodos, and it was so easy to kill. Simply that. And they didn't even like it. It wasn't even so good to eat, according to the sources. So the dodo. Il Rafus cucullatus era diventato raro fino alla morte. The translation is mine, so I apologize if it's not perfect, but anyway. Ma questo singolo individuo in carne e ossa era ancora vivo. Immaginala, dell'età di 30-35 anni. Un'età avanzata per la maggior parte degli uccelli, ma non impossibile per un membro di questa specie di così grandi dimensioni corporee. Non correva più, camminava a fatica. These barkings here, they have a face. A face is barking there. Non correva più, camminava a fatica. Ultimamente stava diventando cieca. Il suo apparato digerente era lento. Nel buio di un primo mattino del 1667, durante un acquazzone, si riparò dietro una pietra fredda, alla base di una delle scogliere del Black River. Si appoggiò la testa lungo il corpo, gonfiò le piume per riscaldarsi e girò gli occhi in un unico sguardo di paziente infelicità. Aspettava. Lei non lo sapeva, nessuno lo sapeva, ma era l'unico dodo rimasto sulla terra. Quando la pioggia passò, i suoi occhi rimasero chiusi per sempre. Questa è l'estinzione. Powerful, isn't it? Rafus cucullatus had become rare unto death, but this one flesh and blood individual still lived. Imagine that she was 30 years old. or 35, an ancient age for most sorts of bird, but not impossible for a member of such a large-bodied species. She no longer ran, she waddled. Lately, she was going blind. Her digestive system was bulky. In the dark of an early morning in 1667, say, during a rainstorm, she took cover beneath a cold stone ledge at the base of one of the Black River cliffs. She drew her head down against her body, fluffed her feathers for warmth, squinted impatient misery. She waited. She didn't know it, nor did anyone else, but she was the only dodo on earth. When the storm passed, she never opened her eyes. This is extinction. It is a pair of eyes that are closed forever. This is extinction, not numbers, not figures, not diagrams. This pair of eyes is extinction. And let me quote the passage that I wanted to quote for you. That I didn't want to quote the Common passage because it's a little bit pathetic. I acknowledge that, even though it's really powerful. But I like very much what Vinciane Desprez, she's a philosopher, a French philosopher and a zoologist, and she writes about Martha and George. These names are familiar to George Washington scholars, because Martha and George was the first couple. Well, Martha and George are the last couple of passenger pigeons hosted in Cincinnati Zoo. And well, passenger pigeons, they were billions at the end of the 19th century, billions. In their migrations, they could be catched with you could have caught them with your bare hands, because there were so many. And in fact, they were killed and slaughtered to death. And they got extinct. There was only this last couple left. And they put this couple, Martha and George, in the zoo of Cincinnati in the hope that they would reproduce. Passenger pigeon in Italian is il piccione pellegrino. Non è il piccione viaggiatore, è un altro. Il piccione viaggiatore non è estinto. The passenger pigeon, the piccione pellegrino, unfortunately, yes. And so these two exemplars were in Cincinnati Zoo, and George died in 1910. Martha instead died on September 1st, 1914 at 1 p.m. So we have precise data. But the fact is that they were already extinct before dying. They were already extinct because they were living in what another very important philosopher, Deborah Bird Rose, one of the founders of multi-species ethnography, calls death zone. It is a zone in which individuals of a species that cannot reproduce, well, they are just sentenced to finish with their, well, once they're dead, the species is over. So they were living, but their species was already dead. And so Vinciane Desprez, it's beautiful what she tells us, because she's telling us something that we rarely think about, namely that when a species dies, not only a genetic heritage passes away, but an entire world of sensations, of feelings, of elaborations of the relationship between this species and the world. A culture dies, an animal culture dies. And let me quote what Vinciane writes. The word dies from each absence. The word bursts from absence. For the entire universe thinks and feels itself, and each being matters in the fabric of its sensations. Every sensation of every being of the world is a mode through which the world lives and feels itself, and through which it exists. And every sensation of every being of the world causes all the beings of the world to feel and think themselves differently. When a being is no more, the world narrows all of a sudden, and a part of reality collapses. Each time an existence disappears, it is a piece of the universe of sensations that fades away. I translated this as follows. Il mondo muore con ogni assenza. Il mondo esplode d'assenza perché l'universo intero pensa e sente se stesso e ogni singolo essere conta nel tessuto delle sue sensazioni. Ogni sensazione di ogni essere del mondo è un modo attraverso il quale il mondo vive e sente se stesso e attraverso cui esiste. E ogni sensazione di ogni essere del mondo è la causa per cui tutti gli esseri del mondo sentono e pensano se stessi in maniera diversa. Quando un essere non è più, il mondo si restringe di colpo e una parte della realtà collassa. Ogni volta che un'esistenza scompare è il pezzo di un universo di sensazioni che si dissolve. This is really the Caesar. This is a branch of the future that is excluded from being, a past which is forever past, and it's an impoverishment of the fabric of sensations and also of the cognitive instruments that the world has to perceive itself. And here, let me quote Calvino again. Calvino says, l'uomo è solo un'occasione che il mondo ha per organizzare alcune informazioni su se stesso. So the human is just one opportunity that the world has to organize information about itself. So every species and every individual is one occasion, one opportunity that the world has to organize information about itself. Think about the millions of years that species have taken to develop this world of sensations. So extinction is this remote history that is collected by the genes of every individual, and it is the individual. So you see really like in a lens, you can see the double zooming in and zooming out. You can see the species, and you can see the individual, and you have the world in between. Every presence is a take on the world, is a voice of the world, is a couple of eyes that through which the world sees itself. And so just to conclude, I'd like to conclude with two images, one of peace and one of war, but perhaps they are both of peace, right? The first image is an image that was very dear to Anna Maria Ortese. Again, Anna Maria Ortese is one of my favorite writers, so I'm very partial, but it's very easy to love Anna Maria Ortese, I think, because she was a writer of love for the little creatures of creation. She named the animal, le piccole creature della creazione, le piccole persone, she called non-human animals. And by piccole, she meant quelle creature prive di peccato che chiamiamo animali, okay? So these creatures without guilt that we name animals. And then, anyway, she has this picture of Saint Jerome that removes the thorn from the paw of the lion, right? And in this removing the paw from the thorn from the paw of the lion, you see this mutual redemption of the human that removes the thorn and of the wild animals, the predator that doesn't kill the human, because I don't think it's a very pleasant experience just to be vis-a-vis with a lion, even if you are a saint or a hermit, right? So it's not so pleasant. The lion can just have a little bit of fun with you, but removing the thorn from the paw of the lion means this mutual redemption between the human and the non-human. It means that we need to touch that hand, see that face, And we need to also to become with that non-human. It is in this way that the human is humanized, is made humane, doesn't stay a taxonomy human, but it becomes an ethical subject. It becomes humane, right? It helps another, a complete other, a predator in this case, to overcome its pain. But it is through this contact, which is a direct contact with the paw of the lion, that we become human and humane. Without the contact, we stay in our gulf of separation, in our ontological trenches, right? And so the other, and here I really finish, the other picture that I want to leave you with is the picture of an armadillo. And I take it from, may I say, my favorite poet, right? Fabio Pusterla, who is a Swiss-Italian poet that I hope will be perhaps soon a guest of Foscari. Perhaps we can invite him to be with us, because he would have so many things to say. And Fabio Pusterla has a series of poems about the armadillo as a species, because he reflects about the fact that the armadillo as a species is just going from south to north due to global warming or even human activities. So as a species, the armadillo is moving north from South America or anyway the United States to Canada. And he pictures this the change of this ecological niche. He pictures that through the story of this single armadillo. And there is one poem in which the armadillo has a very nice, a very strange or weird meeting with a tank, right? Con un carro armato. The translation, I read it in Italian first. Se il carro armato potesse pensare, forse sarebbe stupito. Invece è vuoto, arrugginito e impolverato. Ma l'armadillo è cocciuto. Lei è grande e grosso, gli dice, ma non parla, non saluta. Dovrò morire di sete davanti a un maleducato? Per fortuna, dalla mestizia del cannone sbuca adagio un topino. Non badargli, gli fa. Questo è un disadattato. Vieni dentro, ti offro qualcosa. E l'armadillo ringrazia. If the tank could think, it might be amazed. In fact, it is empty, rusty and covered in dust. But the armadillo is obstinate. You are big and strong, he says, but you don't speak, don't even say hello. Must I die of thirst because you are so boorish? Fortunately, a mouse emerges slowly from the decrepitude of the barrel. Don't take any notice, she says. He's a freak. Come inside, I'll get you something. And the armadillo thanks her. The translation is by Simon Knight. So, you see, the armadillo is right. Tanks are freaks. So, gli armadilli, i carri armati, dobbiamo farli diventare dei disadattati. War is something which must be overcome. And this is actually an invitation to demilitarize our ontologies. This is the wish that I'm leaving you with. Let's get rid of tanks and let's get together with armadillos, mice, dogs, cats, Martha and George, and the Rufus cucullatus, and also the few humans that we like to be petted by. That's it.
Thank you, Serenella, for this wonderful talk and for evoking so many images of both war and peace. And we are happy to take a few questions, I think, from the audience. I don't know if someone is also looking online. sorry, just a note. I also forgot to thank the very crucial people who always help us to put things together. So thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Giulia, for helping us, and thank you to the technicians as well. Sorry, I don't know your names. Grazie. Grazie per averci aiutati a preparare la sala oggi. Any questions for Serenella? Or thoughts or
memories of pets, if you want. I mean, pictures of your. Of course. Tonia. Thank you, Tonia.
Anyway, actually, thank you for mentioning a lot of things about like Ukraine. And out of my own curiosity, I was actually since the beginning kind of collecting and even sharing with my pals some information about non-human animals in this situation, and also regarding not only like shelters and domesticated animals, but wild animals. And it's really interesting because in the current situation, we could also think about not only how directly affecting war is for animals, but for example, there is this thing about obviously birds coming back in the spring, and we know that there is no animal plants flying over Ukraine for some sort of reason, right? And obviously there's also this issue about birds coming back, and currently scientists in Ukraine, they gonna search about actual consequences that's going to be much longer than even situation is lasting now. And it's really interesting, but I believe there is no many information in English. So if you're interested, I can send you via email something.
Thank you very much, Tonia. This is important because and of course, the case of Ukraine is the most it resounds very much with our sensibility today, because we can see these things happening now. But imagine how many borders covered with barbed wire fences are hampering migrations, for example. So we see, in this case, we are talking about birds and we are talking about the effects of pollution, war pollution, and I'd be very curious to know more. And this is part of the ecology of war, right? But think about all the animals that don't have wings and that actually cannot cross the borders because they are now closed with barbed wire. So the Syrian Afghanistan border, for example, is one of a site of migration for the Atay gazelle. And these gazelles are no longer able to cross these borders.
The US-Mexican border.
Also. Sure, but there are so many, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like with wings and without, but particularly about birds, it was kind of interesting because, I mean, birds didn't Google the situation as I did. I mean, because my neighbor, I was in Kiev at that moment, she woke me up, obviously, but then I had to Google because I was thinking she was overreacting and there is no war.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic story.
Yeah.
Also, and no, that's I'm not sharing. Anyway, so yeah, I was saying that birds were not even aware, and you know, Ukraine much northern than Italy, so they have this flying back much further. So it's only happening recently. And it was really interesting for me to read about that particular interest. And it's also fascinating because people, for example, saying about how I am capable to study, but in Ukraine, scientists are studying birds themselves, and they're just like in that situation.
Yeah, well, we have to be also always to remember this perhaps over-quoted sentence by Donna Haraway. Right now, the world is full of refugees, human and not, without a refuge. That's the point. Human and not human. Refugees, human and not without a refuge. That's the condition of many living beings now. That's the end of refuge is one of the issues of our time.
And then there are those that cannot escape because they are always stuck in factory parks. They cannot be even refugees.
No.
They cannot move.
No.
They're born there, they die there, even because they are killed or because they are bombed, but they don't have even the chance to be a refugee. And thinking about being refugees as a chance is really, really painful.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I only I only touched upon this subject because this would open an abyss here. But of course, that's the ontology, the militarized ontology that we have. So, and there are so many connections between the history of
zoos, and there are quite a few studies about the links between these kind of cages and carceral spaces, and so the common oppression of human and non-human animals.
Yes, and the profits that go from to the war industry and meat industry. Well, anyway, so many connections in the ecology of war. There are so many, and the ecology of meat.
I have a quick question for you. You at some point you mentioned, of course, the colonial exercise and how this idea of collecting and gathering is one of the key strategies of imperial powers, and we know of countless museums that are created in this period to display and gather and actually create waves of extinction in several parts of the world, particularly Southeast Asia and Africa. And so there's a lot of work, of course, being done now in London, in New York, in many of the former imperial capitals, and in Berlin. What do you think about that work? I mean, is it effective? How is it? How are we decolonizing, in a sense, or are we decolonizing the natural history? Well, I'm thinking more about natural history museums. I mean, do you think that work is doing something? Is it healing? How is it? Or should it be done differently? Who should be the people involved? In a sense, are we kind of sort of just looking at ourselves, or is there something more interesting going on, do you think? I mean, if you have looked at this at all.
Well, this is a subject that I didn't study directly, but of course, it's always important that when a past or practices are decolonized. But in these cases, the subjects of this decolonization will never be able to speak. That's the point. Because, of course, I don't think it's, we might try to translate their voices, but it's always us speaking for them, you see. And this is the question when you talk about decolonization. Even if you want to decolonize a memory, if you want to decolonize a practice of, writing a natural history, etc., the subjects involved are non-human, and so this is a big challenge. And so, but thank you for this. Is something I will definitely read more about it, and I will ask you. One of the scholars that wrote about zoos was in fact this gigantic Chinese geographer Yi Tuan. He was one of the names, big names of a monumental work on zoos.
Domanda su Zoom.
Oh, domanda su Zoom.
Great. Well, thank you. This is so advanced. So are you familiar with the novel Watership Down by Richard Adams? I believe it is a very interesting example of a work of literature that demassifies animals and makes them emerge as individuals.
Grazie. No, I'm not familiar with this work, but I'm happy to take note.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who is the one that is recommending me this novel? The name of the person?
We don't know.
Grazie. Thank you very much for, okay, David Adam Watership Down. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. And there's more? No. Okay. So thank you very much again.
Grazie.
And let's gather in a different, standing up.
Grazie.
Un'altra domanda.
Okay.
Oh, they're getting exciting. No. Okay, thanks, Serenella, for the wonderful talk. Following up on the idea of decolonization, do you think we should decolonize the idea of death itself?
Of death?
Itself. I'm referring here at the work of Mancuso and others.
Mm-hmm. It is a fascinating question, which I don't understand.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I would like to perhaps the
it's
one.
A very profound.
It's too profound for me now because I need to elaborate on that. Decolonize the idea of death. It's very important because of. But I don't know whether we colonize the idea of. I don't understand.
Thinking about Mancuso, yeah. Yeah. We will.
Can you help me understand this question? I don't want to dismiss the question. Simply, I don't understand it.
Oh, I see. Death has a different meaning than for us humans. Should that for other humans?
It's not a question of colonizing death. It's a question of describe. I mean, I don't know whether it's a question of colonizing.
Yes. A particular historical moment. I guess we will have to pass on that.
Comment about language and the idea of speaking for the animal, because this is something that I've been studying a little bit, especially regarding standpoint epistemology from a feminist perspective. And there are a couple, not more, essays talking about animal standpoint. And also, of course, there's also a completely different perspective, the one that is not the Western one, thinking about, for example, Amazonian cosmologies and what Viveiros de Castro's write.
Yes.
But still, I think quoting Haraway, because it's something that I really know very well, she, in The Promises of Master, she talks against the idea of being a ventriloquist for the animal. And she says, who speaks for the jaguar, who speaks for the fetus? And she talks about natives and native people, comparing, of course, the idea of animalization and so on and so forth. But what I am thinking now is that we do not need to go out from our anthropocentric perspective, provided that it doesn't become an instrument, a tool of dominance. I mean, we cannot but speak as humans, because if we try to behave or be like animals, we are romanticizing them. We are kind of negating what are the social relations that make us human animals towards non-human animals. But still, the idea should be being self-reflexive, and this probably comes from sociology, and try to not use one's words and one's tools in order to dominate the other, be it human or non-human animal, because of course oppressions are linked, as you said. And
thank you, Federica. I espouse what you say, perhaps except for the idea of, I would say, we don't need to demonize, and you said, if I correctly understood, I agree, but you say that we don't need to reject our anthropocentrism. I would say we don't need to reject our anthropomorphism more than anthropocentrism, because the anthropocentrism is an ontology. Anthropomorphism is a strategy. And let me add something that I take from one of the first theories of eco-criticism. This is Joseph Micker, who was an ethologist and a scholar of comparative literature, a friend of Konrad Lorenz. He says, whenever we think that we are anthropomorphizing animals, we are in fact zoomorphizing. And there are so many things, so many issues, so many instances that show that we are in fact zoomorphs. So our behaviors are more zoomorph than vice versa. So there are so many similarities, and anthropomorphism is a strategy that allows us to come closer, to describe. It's a bridge. And in this case, I perfectly agree with you. But anthropocentrism,
of course, as an ideology, and yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And let's. So we can all gather downstairs. There will be a few drinks that we can continue the conversation in a more relaxed form.
We are very tense.